On session. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mayor Baker,
Here.
Councilmember Curtis,
Present.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Van Ness,
Excused.
Councilmember Sperry. Here. Councilmember Herbig,
Here.
Councilmember Danuski. Here. Thank you.
So if you would please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening.
All right. Next item on the agenda is a proclamation. And let's just get over to that.
Approval of the agenda, Mayor.
I beg your pardon?
Approval of the agenda.
Oh, you're right. So if there are no objections, the agenda will stand approved as written. Hearing none, the agenda stands approved. So, Domestic Violence Awareness Month nationwide is in October every year. So, the council is in support of declaring the month of October as the Domestic Violence Awareness Month here in Kenmore. And there is a national campaign going on that, believe it or not, was started right here in Carnation, where people are, for the month of October, putting in a purple porch light. And those porch lights I know are available at Home Depot and other places throughout the county. And I would encourage everybody to, for the month of October, burn a purple light and make people aware of this issue of domestic violence and how we're all in favor of that coming to an end. Next item on the agenda is citizen comments. This is your opportunity to express views on issues that are important to you and to the community. And we ask that you please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And if necessary, staff will get back to you with answers within a week or so. So if the clerk could please call the first person.
Karina Fiel.
Hi, I'm Karina File. I live at 18904 68th Avenue Northeast in Kenmore, Washington. I've been a citizen here 25 years, all through college and beyond. But what I wanted to talk about is a little bit of the traffic, pedestrian, right-of-way safety. It's very concerning that when we have young children and youth or adults just in the passage of trying to get somewhere safely, like crossing the street. I can honestly say this last week I was at the intersection of 182nd and 68th, and I watched a young girl push the flashlight, push the crosswalk sign light, and she was maybe a quarter away passing in the crosswalk. And there were two cars racing up on my right, and I was in the turn lane, and my son was in the car with me, and we were on our way to ATP. And the poor girl was hardly through that crosswalk. And so I just laid on my horn, because I'm seeing these two cars just fly up. And all of a sudden they put on their brakes. They're halfway through that intersection, and that girl had to run. And it was so sad. This has got to be like an elementary age student. And what we have on 68th coming down this way is 35 miles per hour. And then all of a sudden there's a speed reduction sign right before this intersection. And I'm wondering if maybe this is a good time to install a flashing light that there is a speed reduction of going to 25 miles per hour. Maybe it needs to be done more than just a few feet from the 25 mile per hour sign, to give people a little bit more awareness that's there. And somehow I think Kenmore needs to help educate their community that on a 2-lane road, it is not the right of way to take those turns or to fly on by when a pedestrian is still in that crosswalk. It's rather a dangerous and scary situation. So I think a flashing light would help reduce some of this speediness in flying through, at least quickly, to downtown Kenmore. And on a different note, being green, I understand there's a wonderful system being reviewed in King County, in the south side of King County, where apartment buildings are harvesting rainwater, and they're using 205-gallon 3-citrine containers to catch the harvested water, to water their grounds, and also to develop rain gardens. And this system was so effective that in 2014 of August, in review, they were able to have saved and treated 86,000 gallons of water. That's kind of a huge impact when you're looking at an apartment building. And as a rebate to that same building, they received an $18,000 rebate. And I think that brings us to highlighting companies that want to work green, and how do we acknowledge those companies, those businesses, those organizations, and what is going to be the notable appreciation or acknowledgement of businesses working towards being green, because I would be glad to support a business or a residence that is making an effort, a great effort at that, in being green and saving our local community and impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Carl Michaelman.
Hi, Carl Michaelman, 18023 62nd Avenue Northeast, beautiful Kenmore, Washington. I'm coming to the council to have just a little bit of a comment regarding, you guys are going to be discussing about a poll on 62nd, and I've approached a couple of the councils here. I just kind of want to touch base and give you my 2 cents worth of what my thoughts are on this. I have some concerns. We all agree that that there's been some bad miscommunication regarding this poll that's kind of sticking out. I'm really hoping that everybody has seen it and drove by. My concern is a mistake was made, and we got 2 issues. The council can go ahead and say, yep, we have the right to do it, or the council, to make it right, to do the right thing. I guess my concern is if we had this poll somewhere up the hill, or where my house is, back up in the area, which I don't even know what they call it. But anyways, or Milt, in your area. The issue would be, we wouldn't have this conversation, or at least not such a serious conversation. I think the bigger issue is that because it's sitting at the lake, we're dealing with this issue. What's ironic is it's kind of contrary to what's going on with how the city council takes our waterfront and looks at the views. Okay? This isn't about one person. I think the thing is that what concerns me of this whole thing is there was no communication. And it could have been ended up the same way, but I got to tell you that poll was down in front of Ian's place. And I thought, oh, that's going to go and take place of the poll that is there. And then we both looked, and there it is. And it's not the issue of, yeah, you have the right to do it. I think the bigger issue is it's contrary to how we go ahead and we talk about the views of the Lake Washington, and how we say it's our asset, and how we say that we want to protect that. And putting the pole there, just like I said, the problem is, you can argue, yes, it's a view and the thing, but on the other side of the coin is, I think just going ahead and looking at it and how we view our asset in the lake view, that we would be more communication-wise to discuss it. It's costing $40,000, which I'm very much aware of, but if we started the process to begin with earlier, okay, $40,000 is taking the pole out and moving it. If we communicated beforehand and came maybe with a compromise, it would have never cost, it would cost money. But I think it's the point is the mistake was made. I think to do the right thing is to fix this and to understand that our asset of our waterfront, I mean, we're putting poles up and this is one thing, I'm not qualified because I don't know this, but if you recall, we brought the heights down to 35 feet on that area. That pole is more than 35 feet. But I'm not qualified if that can happen or it can happen. But it's new to the assets that we're dealing with the waterfront. So what I'm saying is, to me, it's not an issue as in the pole being there. It's the issue how we take how you, the council, are saying we want to deal with the water and not, have views and everything else. But it's contradiction of it coming back, and we've just put up a new pole, another piece to take that view. So that's my 2 cents. I would hope that you would support me on that because it's just a bigger issue, not one person, but us to protect our waterfront and not just put stuff up there because you can do it. So I thank you for your time, and I hope you do the right thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Michaelman.
Ian McDonald.
Hello, I'm Ian MacDonald, 18018 62nd Avenue, Northeast Kenmore. I've lived in Kenmore for about 45 years, and I really like it. One of the most important things to me is the lake, the proximity. I've owned this property quite a while, since '99, and since my ownership, there has been changes in the zoning, and there's been changes in height restrictions, and the height was brought down to 35 feet. And that pole is 45 feet tall, and it's in the exact view corridor that those ordinances were passed to protect. I'm not really quite sure how I ended up here, because at one point I approached the city and they had agreed to move the pole, and some more time went by, and then it was told that I'd have to come before city council, that it would be a city council decision. But I tried to figure out reasons that pole shouldn't be there. And first of all, I had been working on that property because I was trying to fix it up to rent it, and it sat empty for 4 months because largely this construction that was going on, and I brought a few pictures so you could see that. But I never thought that pole was going to go up in front of my property, which is 135 feet long, and it has now 3 telephone poles in front of it. So I just ignored it, and then, as Carl said, turned around and there it was. Well, when I saw this project starting, I was really excited about the sidewalks and everything, but I looked at the map and I had no reason for concern. I think I provided a copy of the map to you folks, and the construction zone ended 2.5 feet from the corner of my property, and that pole is about 30 feet up the hill. So I really had no idea that that's what was going to happen. The view of the lake is really important, and no one contacted me about this, and I just think it's not only myself that would benefit if the pole was farther up. You can't park within 20 feet of that stop sign, so we wouldn't lose any frontage for parking. It is out of the view corridor, and it's the least of 2 evils. Personally, I don't want that pole there, but if it has to be there, it's a choice between bad and worse. And if it's up the hill, it's not as bad, and it does protect the view corridor. And so I'm asking for those reasons that the city council would approve having that pole relocated as far north as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Ann Anderson.
Ann Anderson, 16304, 81st Place Northeast. And first I'd like to say thank you to Bob Carlinci, Lori Anderson, and Andrew Bauer for all their input and responsiveness, but I still have questions. I'm not here tonight to stress the benefits of trees, that they're definitely for the common public good. I'm here tonight to talk about actionable items in protecting trees. Like, what can we do about it as members of Kenmore? There needs to be a better balance between population density and green space. So 3 items I want to address. I think the city is inadequately communicating to inform the public of drastic changes when lot after lot is cleared. Clear cut of beautiful old growth trees, a treasure we'll never get back. And number 2, trees are not given a fair trial or chance at public hearings. The hearing examiner, as confirmed in this last meeting I went to, is not impartial and will side with the city and builder almost every time. And 3, tree regulations are woefully under enforced, and there's no tree professional or arborist on staff. So there's no advocate for trees in the city. Okay, I believe the city is keeping the public in the dark, maybe not on purpose, to not properly inform the public of drastic sudden changes, like with public notices to neighbors. Granted, I've only been here for 3 years and I'm just coming into the space, but I've only received 1 public notice in the mail, and I went on a walk, and in my short walk I counted 10 new public notices posted that I never got any, I was never informed of. So, so when you're planning these big new developments, it's important, you know, they're big changes to our landscape and our ecosystem that you let the public know. And number 2 is tree advocates are not given a fair trial or chance at public hearings. At the September 15th Planning Commission wind tree throw hearing, Doug Nugent on record stated, you know, I'm paraphrasing, it's out of context, but that hearing examiners at public hearings are not impartial because they are hired by the city, paid by the city, and don't want to disappoint the city. So when we make our public comments, we are not being heard. Even if it's all the red flags, like if it's in a landslide area or erosion hazard area, the hearing examiner's mind has already been made up. And so basically the city and the builder, whatever they want, they get without thinking about the green space. And also tree regulations are woefully under enforced. New developments should be systematically checked out by an arborist. So if I'm just here today to save 1 tree, it will help my family, it will help my community for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
There's no one else signed up.
Anybody else wishing to speak? Pedestrian and public safety. Ms. Powell, this is very, very important to this council. We've taken a number of steps in the past year to try to do what we can to increase the public's awareness and certainly provide and protect for pedestrians and safety. I know that we have recently joined the national movement of Target Zero. We have asked our police officers to step up enforcement of crosswalk violations. I know on a 2-lane road that people have to be clear of the intersection before cars can go. Unfortunately, our police can't be everywhere, but we definitely share your concerns about this, and we are looking at reducing the speed limits in a number of locations, and I think one of those is on the agenda for tonight. So we are certainly aware of the issues that you're talking about, and we are very, very concerned about it, and we have taken action. I think that's one of the reasons you're now seeing the flashing lights and the flags at intersections, but there's more public education to be done. But I want you to know that we are very concerned about this also.
Your Honor, if I can also add that we can have our traffic engineer follow up with her. His name is Brett Schock, and he can talk to you about plans that we have for that road section.
Mr. Michaelman, Mr. McDonald, thank you for your comments. This issue is on our agenda for tonight, so we will be addressing it. Yes. Anyway, Ms. Anderson, certainly, I think the council shares your concerns on trees. We have, and I think it's one of the reasons the Planning Commission is looking at the wind throw issue because of some of the clear cutting. I know that I personally feel strongly about not reducing canopy cover. However, as far as the notifications, I know also that if you live within 1,000 feet of a development, you are notified. If you live more than 1,000 feet away, then you're not notified. And I'm seeing nods of yes, that is correct. But, Mr. Casaguma, since you're the attorney, can you please address the impartiality of the hearing examiner? Because I think there's some erroneous information going around.
Well, the hearing examiner presumably is fair and impartial. The city contracts with a hearing examiner for a certain period of time, which means that the city does not have the opportunity to influence the decision or the proceedings of the hearing examiner during that contract period. So that's about all I can say about it.
Mr. Carlins, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, one thing is citizens can sign up for notification of all land use notices by getting on our land use notice listserv. So whether they live 1,000 feet away or not, citizens can sign up for all land use notices.
Right, and that's I think computer-based.
Yeah.
Email.
Yeah, email. Yep.
I know the postage stuff is right now currently at 1,000 feet. But I know for a fact that the hearing examiners do have their own opinions and do make up their mind that is not necessarily always to the developer's benefit. And I know one of the things that we are concerned with too is some of the cutting down of trees that perhaps shouldn't be. So anyway, thank you for your comments. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And I'll second it. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The consent agenda stands approved unanimously. Next item on the agenda is discussion and approval of ordinance number 15-0405, speed limit change on Northeast 175th between 61st and 73rd. Ms. Overlease, our Public Works Director and City Engineer, and Mr. Schock, the Traffic Engineer.
Good evening, Mayor Baker and Council. So we're going to let Brett go ahead and talk to you about this item.
Good evening. The speed limit on Northeast 175th Street between 73rd and 61st is currently 35 miles an hour. This was retained from the speed set by King County prior to the city's incorporation. In response to citizen and staff requests, earlier this year, a speed study was initiated by King County staff. This study takes into account various factors related to the physical geometric layout of the road, the density of intersections, the density of driveways, and adjacent pedestrian facilities such as the Burke-Gilman Trail. The study also accounts for the measured speed of drivers who are reacting to the current characteristics of the roadway. So data was taken directly on 175th. I have reviewed the results of this study and do agree with its findings that based on the physical characteristics of 175th, along with the measured behavior of drivers under the current conditions, a recommended reduced speed limit of 30 miles an hour is appropriate between 61st and 73rd Avenues. Upon passage of the ordinance in front of you, we can adjust the signage to show the new limit and place temporary signage to alert drivers of the change. The speed on 175th east of 73rd is currently 25 miles an hour and will remain so. If you have any questions on this recommendation, I can answer them now.
Questions? So the chair will entertain a motion to approve the speed limit change ordinance number 15-0405.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Councilmember Sperry.
I just speak in favor, and I just wanted to say thank you to our city engineer and staff for providing the study and the data that helps to support a very reasonable reduction in speed. Thank you.
Any further discussion, comments? Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Herbig?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Sperry?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
6-0.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda,
Thank you.
transit-oriented development. Continued review. Ms. Bent and Ms. Anderson. Well, looks like we have Mrs. Anderson and we have Arthur Sullivan. Good to see you, Arthur.
Good evening, Mayor Baker and members of the City Council. Tonight we are continuing our discussion of the Transit-Oriented Development, or TOD, District Overlay. The goal, if possible, is to settle on the package of amendments that would move forward to a public hearing and possible ordinance adoption on October 12th. As you know, the purpose of the TOD overlay is to reinforce the city's planned concentration of pedestrian-oriented mixed-use development at intensities that support and are supported by multimodal transportation options, including high-capacity transit along SR 522. The TOD overlay would allow a developer to achieve higher densities and reduced parking in areas close to transit service in exchange for the provision of affordable housing and other amenities. The overlay would be optional. A developer could choose whether to develop under the existing zoning rules or to develop under the standards of the overlay. Attachment 2 in your packet is the map of the proposed overlay area, generally located east of 73rd Avenue Northeast and north of SR 522 in areas generally zoned downtown commercial or multifamily. The proposal would add incentives to support transit-supportive densities. A minimum density of 40 dwelling units per acre would be required. A maximum of 120 dwelling units per acre would be permitted. Building height would be increased to 65 feet, although buildings within 50 feet of a single-family zone could only develop to 35 feet in height. Affordable housing would be required. At a first threshold, moderate income affordable housing would have to be provided. At a second threshold, low income housing at 50% of median would have to be provided. The total number of affordable housing units would not exceed 10% of the total units in the development, and the affordable housing would continue to serve income eligible households for 50 years. Parking reductions, parking would be reduced to 1 stall per unit with a further allowance for affordable and senior housing to 0.6 stalls per unit. Commercial parking requirements could be reduced to 75% of the minimum requirement. On-street parking adjacent to the development could be counted toward the minimum parking requirement. Parking in excess of the minimum would have to be placed in a structured parking garage. And the first projects developed under the overlay, called Pioneer Projects, would have further parking reductions as an incentive. All of the new development would have to comply with the city's most restrictive design standards, Design Standard 1. And additional dwelling units and reduced parking could be provided for preservation of significant tree groves. And TOD would have to improve pedestrian connectivity by creating an extensive network of sidewalks and pedestrian walkways. So that's a general overview. At your July 21st meeting, when we first reintroduced the topic of TOD, you had asked several questions about the proposed overlay, and staff responses are provided in the agenda bill. In response to those questions, staff is recommending 2 changes to the draft regulations. First, to eliminate the reduced affordable housing requirement for pioneer projects, so that pioneer projects would only have a parking reduction incentive. And second, to eliminate the minimum distance between trees in the tree grove. So staff is also recommending a new amendment, one that has just come to our attention, that would clarify that preservation of significant tree groves in critical areas or their buffers would not merit a density bonus or reduced parking. So that would be a change from the regulations that are in front of you this evening. So I'm here with Arthur Sullivan from Arch to address additional questions or concerns. Otherwise, the amendments would move forward to the October 12th public hearing.
Questions? Dr. Curtis.
So if we accept this as is being proposed, we would not be changing the density at all. So it would be the 40 units per acre minimum and 120 maximum.
Correct. Right. And this is just to move the amendments forward to the public hearing. So we're trying to get the range of provisions in front of the public. We would also hope to bring an ordinance forward that evening, but this is not obviously tonight the final decision.
Because I was sort of looking at the pictures there, and I saw a couple of the examples. One was a 5-story Kirkland Park and Ride, 134.6 units per acre.
Right.
And it seems like for 65 feet tall, you could probably get a 5-story building. Could you get a 6-story building?
I think you could get a 6-story building if it was exclusively residential. It would be maybe if it was mixed use. You might not be able. You might have 1 story of retail or office, which has a higher floor plate, and then the residential on top.
So the reason I'm asking that the 65 feet seems reasonable. It's only either slightly higher or about what the new commercial part of Kenmore Village will be.
Right.
And if we could get more density in the same height, I'd be happy to see a little more density in the same height.
Clarification. Wasn't there a variance on height across the street?
I think there was some discussion in the development agreement for the new building.
Right.
The existing buildings range from 36 feet to about 55 and a half feet. The height limit is 65 feet for mixed use in downtown commercial, which is the TOD,
Okay.
one of the TOD zones.
So I guess in discussions that Sound Transit has indicated that for ST3 they're looking at transit-oriented developments, but they're looking at a density of a minimum of 120 units.
I don't know that Sound Transit has spoken to this issue. I know when the Downtown Task Force met several years ago when they were developing these recommendations that they had representatives from Metro, and I'm not sure if there was a Sound Transit representative, but they were saying that 40, 120, 40 I think would certainly be
But that was
minimum.
the bare minimum from my understanding, was the 120.
Well, the 40 I think was the minimum required in the TOD is 40. The maximum is 120 under these proposed regulations.
Did you have conversations? Where am I getting this 120 from?
Yeah, I have not heard that as a minimum from.
That sounds like a high number for a minimum for TOD. I think that's why we showed you the examples you can. I mean, we had one example that was much higher, but that was also micro units development. We could follow up, but I've never heard, I've worked with other cities and I haven't heard a standard of that minimum before.
Okay.
But we can follow up just to ensure that.
And the other concern that I have is the affordability requirements. I think given the number of people that are retiring and the way that things are developing, certainly in the county, that we really don't have enough affordable housing at the 35% level. And I'm wondering if there's something that could be done for incentive-based that would allow, for instance, workforce housing at 50% and senior housing at 35% of median income.
That would be pretty challenging because the unit sizes are not necessarily all that much smaller. It doesn't cost any much difference to build the senior versus. Now, along those lines, an idea we are exploring is if we can get a unit down to 50, 60% of median income, even in some cases 70%, then those units, and typically with cities, will include in the covenant that you can't discriminate against Section 8. And in many communities, especially in the Northeast and East King County, people with vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, which is federal assistance, have a hard time finding housing in the community that has low enough rents. We are pursuing ideas in some of the other East Side cities now that have similar programs that you're looking at, to work with the owners to sort of not only not discriminate against, but potentially work with those owners to create opportunities where that assistance can be put into those affordable units. And so that's an angle we could potentially pursue more, or either just through the general program or more explicitly try to make that happen. And we've been working with the Housing Authority and starting conversations with some private owners to look into that, creating that opportunity.
So I guess I know that Councilmember Curtis has said before that he would love to be able to see density for 20 businesses in 3 blocks. And, I think that we really need to get the density to support that. And if there was a way to increase the density with some credits given to the developer, that if they were to build an more affordable component, that perhaps we could go to 140, 160. I mean, I would certainly like to at least see that option presented for the public hearing to see, what the public's perception of that was.
So if I'm understanding that, the idea, just like we took a second tier to get to 50% of median, you're implying some language to go a third tier essentially, which would be above what's in the ordinance now, to go down to an even greater level, to have some of the units be even more affordable. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's my thought, but I mean, I want it purely incentive-based. I don't want to force anybody to do anything.
Right, and that's...
So that would be their choice.
It would be their choice to use the density. Right now, if they use so much, they are going to do some at 50. Right. If they were to go above this maximum right now that you have, you're saying we'd like to even bring it down some more if you go even higher.
That's my
is that what?
Right. I mean, Arthur, certainly after serving on the Joint Recommendations Committee and seeing what's available in the county and knowing what's coming down the pike, I'm concerned, and I think that we ought to make some provisions to at least allow for a voluntary 35%, but by giving them some density bonuses.
If that's an interest of the council, we can draft. I was asking the question just to clarify what the statement was. We're happy to help draft something like that. We'll look at the numbers to see how much the rents are and translate it using similar kind of math as we use to get to the 50% level to see what that would feel and look like. You would be breaking new ground, which is fine. I mean, I'm excited about the opportunity to present an idea for you to consider. Getting to 50% of median was stretching how land use has typically been used, but we think it's rational the way you've done it. Happy to give you a further alternative to look at that would take some units even further down.
Yeah, I guess I'm just concerned, by people making $10, $12, $15 an hour and having to live 40 miles away from their work. I would certainly like to see if it was possible to provide, some opportunities to live a little bit closer to work. But
so is the council asking that we prepare that as an alternative for the public hearing?
Councilmember Herbig, Councilmember Smith and Councilmember Sperry.
Before we vote on that or give direction on that, I actually really like that idea. I also, frankly, be interested in going a little bit further and see if maybe there's ways that we could, because I know that a lot of it comes down to it penciling out for the developer and being able to make their money back, whether they're going to use the additional density or whatever. I'd be interested in seeing if there's ways that we could add in, maybe not an entire extra floor worth of space, but maybe enough room at the top for a loft space or something, which would then boost what they could rent those top levels at to maybe help offset. I'm just kind of trying to think out of the box here, but if there's ways that we could get some really affordable housing in Kenmore, I think that we should look at whatever options are available. And if the developer wants to take us up on it and they get an extra 5 feet to build some lofts, I don't see any harm in that, and I see some good coming from it. So what do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
That one would probably take more analysis to think through. It's an interesting angle. I don't know. I think the one of giving density, because we showed you examples in the footprint you have now that going higher than the 120 is potentially doable. And so for that one, the math is a little more, the trying to translate what you're offering in exchange for affordability is a little more straightforward. That idea is intriguing. I mean, I'm always interested in any new intriguing idea. I don't know the value, and to understand that well enough in time if you want to move this ordinance forward at this time. That might be something you identify for a refinement like in a year from now or something along those lines, and allow more time to explore what is the trade-off and what feels right. It's something to look at. That would be a lot more work than the first idea that's been put on the table. And I sense there is some timing issue with getting at least some. You've been waiting a long time to get this in place. It's always possible to refine, and I think you wouldn't be losing that opportunity. But I'm not sure we could turn that around like in a week or so, where the other one I think we could.
Okay, fair enough. And we are going to be having, it sounds like next year, we'll be having a bigger discussion about affordability.
Exactly.
Anyway. Maybe we can fold that in. I also really like your idea of taking away the ability to discriminate based on where people are getting their rent money from. I know that doesn't really fit into what we're discussing here, but I think that does fit into what we're discussing next year, and I want to make sure we keep that on the plate because I don't think a landlord should really care where the money's coming from as long as the check clears. So,
Redmond has done something to that effect. Councilmember Smith, then Councilmember Sperry, then Councilmember Curtis, and then Councilmember Danuski.
Yeah, what I'd like to see are just somewhat what was discussed earlier, and I want to keep it incentive-based, though, as much as anything. I really don't want to have to penalize the property owner. And so I'm very open to density changes and other creative options that can be done within the scope of the site. I am curious about your comments on Section 8. So I'm familiar with Section 8, and I'm curious how would you get to a point where you would be able to get a property owner to rent more to a Section 8 or to, I assume you're not telling them you're not compelling them to do it. I'm just curious how that happens and how you would see even remotely something like that structured.
So the first step is having rent levels that are within the parameters of the Section 8 program. And that's one of the big challenges. The vast majority of Section 8 in King County land and other parts of the county because of the rent issue. King County Housing Authority, to their credit, allows people to pay a little more rent on the east side than they do in other parts of the county because of the high cost. So that's the first hurdle. And so that's why we've added the language when we do land use programs. You can't discriminate against people if you have for the affordable units. Because often, especially at the levels you're talking about here, you should be getting the rents and any affordable units eligible for the program. So you've at least opened that door and made it clear to developers, we want you not to discriminate. The second step, and I'm hoping in a few months maybe I'll have a more direct answer for you. We are literally talking to some of the owners to say, well, you have these units. The Housing Authority is very interested in having Section 8 assistance in those units. Can we figure out a way to make that work? And we've at least had several owners say, we'll talk with you about it. We'll see if it lands literally at a place where they agree they will make those units available for people with Section 8 and work directly with the Housing Authority. That's the conversation we're trying to have. We don't know if we're going to get there. The Housing Authority said they might even they have flexibility on how they can set their rents. They may be willing to even go a little bit higher in order to make something like that work. But we're not to a point where we've got it formalized anywhere, so I can't answer what it might exactly look like.
No, and I appreciate that. And I know one of the difficulties is, at least as I understand it, is that when they do have Section 8 housing, there is a higher level of inspections and other things that fall on that property owner. And I think that's one of the reasons why, because the standard is different than the other tenants. And I think that's where sometimes it becomes a difficult situation to try to incorporate that into the structure of satisfying that Section 8 need.
That is, that's not technically incorrect. The standards that they set are pretty much standards you would want almost any residents to have. There is a process. This housing authority is very well known for how they administer programs, and the federal government gives them latitude to set up their own systems. They have worked very hard to try to make that as efficient. Yes, there is a process. They've tried to make that very efficient. Obviously, we're talking about new buildings here, so there isn't going to be any issue on that end, and that's part of where we're trying to have the discussions right now. Is the nitty gritty of using a program and making sure it works for the property management companies, and so that is why we want to have those conversations. But given we're talking new housing here, I wouldn't expect those standards there to be any issue at all.
I can appreciate that. Thanks.
Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you. Interesting discussion. We always appreciate you being here, Arthur. You bring a lot to the discussion. I think we have really two conversations going on here. The first one is about the transit-oriented development and what we want to see put out for public hearing. And the second is really rolling into our larger affordable housing or housing strategy. So I personally feel like a lot of these things, like the 35%, and I know you've mentioned the Section 8 vouchers and that conversation that you're having, really belong in that bucket. One thing that I would like to see in this particular aspect is, first of all, just a reminder that we currently don't have a transit-oriented development district, and this district does have an affordable housing component, which the underlying zoning now does not. So by even passing this or getting this passed, we are increasing the supply of income-qualified housing. The other thing is, I would like to see I really appreciated the visuals that were included in the packet, because when we saw that the density number really, for the most part, was reflected by unit size, particularly the last example with the micro units. Now, that particular project was very poorly rated on Yelp, just to let you know. So management aside, it seemed like that was an issue. So I would like to see a higher density, not make the 120 a maximum. I'm not sure if how the best way to do that, but I think a higher number could address a lot of the issues that we're talking about and giving the developer more flexibility. I know we're also going to talk about micro-housing, so I guess maybe to frame that in a question, is there a number that would be reasonable in terms of higher units per acre, or is there something that how much room do we have to go on this, I guess is what I would like to ask.
I don't think that there's, from staff's perspective, a certain number that we would have to settle on. I don't know if you practically...
I think that one of the things we were doing with the affordability here is, as we say, we want to cap it at 10%. And that was private sector input. So I think the mayor's comment and the other council members' comment that if you go above 120, then let's get some additional affordability. The reason why we put the 10% cap in was in response to developers saying...
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
Right, so that they have enough value in other units that are unrestricted. And so I think it's kind of an interesting idea of you acknowledging and glad the photographs helped illustrate that 120 is not necessarily a limit for the volume that you've defined. is the way to go would be to keep the 10, but make that 10% more affordable. And so literally looking at some units at 35% a median or something like that, because right now if you just increase the density without asking for more affordability, you could have a challenge down the road to say, oh, we want to now get more affordability, because when we set what we designed, we realized even in that case we were given a little extra even at the 120. So if you're going to give more than that, you really should be looking for more public benefit. And so I think if you want to relax the density limits now further, and maybe I'd have to look at it a little bit harder, maybe it's like 150 or something, I think you should look at some additional affordability to go with that. And whether or not you have to refine that over time, you can always refine by relaxing a little bit, but you can't come in later and say, oh, we should have asked for some of those at 35% now that we understand it better. It doesn't. We've had several cities' hands who have been handcuffed because they didn't do that when they first relaxed it. So right now, the 120 creates sort of a protection for you. If you want to make that more lenient now right up front, then I would err on the side of asking for a little bit more public benefit. And I think the mayor's proposal is at least one way to put that on the table for further discussion.
Councilmember Curtis.
So I have some comments, again, clearly on the density, not the affordability. Okay. So it seems like there's, at a theoretical level, there's two ways to increase density. One is to raise the maximum, the other is to raise the minimum. Okay, so there's minimums in here in two ways. One is we're not requiring anybody to build under the TOD. So the base density is what, 18?
It varies from zone to zone. So it's 18 in some parts of it, it's 12 in other parts of it. I can tell you exactly what the different base densities are, but it's not consistent.
It's ballpark. So, right. If we allowed anybody to build with a 12 or 18, we're not getting anywhere near what we want. So one of my questions is, can we restrict that option? Because now we're saying we're offering a TOD, but people can still build under the old rules. So can we just eliminate the old rules so we don't have to deal with 12 and 18 units per acre?
You could, but you're not setting out an incentive system. Then, if you're just saying make the TOD the zoning.
That's my first question, right? Exactly. Right. So that's the first question. That's one way to eliminate the low end.
Right.
And the other way to eliminate the low end is don't allow as low as 40. Say it's got to go from 60 to 120, right, or whatever we choose. Right. So we're focusing on making the bigger, but I think we need to eliminate the lower end, because that's where you could, in theory, lose lots of units if somebody built. Even at 40, I think is inadequate. Right. So if I had a specific ask, what I want to take to the public, it would be that we vary from 60 minimum to 120, or even 140, rather than 40 as our minimum. So I'd rather see 60 as a minimum.
Okay. In the downtown commercial zone, the minimum is 48, along with the urban corridor along 522. So that's the range. It goes from 12 to 48. So,
but in the area where we're doing this TOD,
right,
there isn't any 48 down there, is there?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so in the area we're talking about right now, I'd like to eliminate the low density as much as possible.
Councilmember Danuski.
I actually had most of my questions answered. I'm for looking to see if there's an incentive-based way to increase a little density if we get some more affordable housing. I think that's something worth looking at. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure about Councilmember Curtis's idea about eliminating the underlying zoning. I'd have to think about that one. Making me think.
18 doesn't get you anywhere near 140.
So if in the downtown commercial zone we have a density now of 48, then why the urgency? I mean, 48 is certainly within the range that.
But that's not the TOD.
Wants.
That's not the TOD area we're talking about.
What?
The downtown commercial.
I might clarify. A small portion of the TOD area is zoned downtown commercial, where the Montessori school along 73rd there. The bulk of it is in urban corridor, which stretches out to the east along 522, and then surrounding multifamily zones.
So, yeah, I guess so. If we do have part of this at 48 and the others there, and since the affordability component is really not, well, at least Councilmember Sperry brought up that that's a separate issue that I think we're going to be talking about at another time. Where is the urgency of getting this done by October 12th, I think you'd indicated? So why can't we just take our time and just do this the right way? You know, with density, with affordability, with all of this.
I think that the interest was in demonstrating to Sound Transit that we had a TOD program in place. I think what Arthur is saying about the increases in density and the corollary asks for more affordable housing is that you could do that in the future. You could go from 120 to 150 or 160 with a corollary increase in affordable housing provided, or a 35% instead of a 50% median income housing provided, but that you can't do it the other way. If you go to 150 now, if you don't include the affordable housing component, you can't go back. Is that?
And I guess with what you're saying, Councilmember Curtis, is you want to see the 20 businesses in 3 blocks. You know, we've got to get the density to be able to support that. I mean, that's one of the issues that we have. Is everybody wants a restaurant. Everybody wants places to go, but you don't necessarily have the population base to support it. And the one thing about doing this transit-oriented development is that you're right there on the bus line. You're right there with the transit, so you can get from A to B without necessarily driving.
So what would be the problem with changing your minimum to 60 instead of 40?
There would not be a problem with it. I think, again, it's the corollary requirement. This is kind of the opposite argument.
You've got the affordability set for that.
Okay, so you don't think there would be an issue there?
Not on the affordability. No.
Okay, all
Because
right.
40 units per acre doesn't get us anywhere, really, it seems to me.
I might point out that this new Spencer Square development, Phase 1 is at 50 dwelling units per acre, and Phase 2 is at 44. That just by way of reference.
Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you. Well, I agree with in concept of having a minimum. If we look at the map and see where a lot of these parcels lie, if you look on it would be the east side of 73rd. Mm-hmm. Those parcels are very, very constrained by wetlands. So there are very small buildable areas.
That's correct.
So my concern would be by putting a minimum there, we may inadvertently stop redevelopment at getting some townhouses or getting there. So that would be my concern, is that we would have an unintended consequence of making it very difficult for people to build on these very environmentally constrained parcels.
Right. I think the idea behind establishing the minimum was to say you have to get to at least a certain level, or you don't get the benefits. You don't.
So this would just be the overlay. It wouldn't be. You have to build this. It would just be an option that you could build a minimum of this amount and then get that. Right. Based on that explanation, then I think that's a great idea.
So, I mean, I don't know, because I sure can't count where we are at least looking at the increased density and the affordability component for the public hearing, and at least see what things look like.
So what I've heard is that I am hearing a general interest in potentially increasing the density and a corollary interest in more affordable housing, and perhaps increasing the minimum density requirement. But I don't know where you all are falling out. That's what I've heard.
So, I mean, yeah, but certainly not a requirement, right? It's an incentive.
The TOD
Yeah,
is not a requirement.
Right. And,
No.
and so the density components or the affordability components are not a requirement. They're
Right.
an
Correct.
incentive.
Still, but I would ask the council the question, would you be happy if this all developed as 18 units or 12 units per acre? Is that what we envision for this area? That's what you're saying. If it's all optional, that's saying you could get the whole thing, if I'm correct, 12 to 18, and I don't think that's what we want, unless I'm just in reading this whole thing wrong.
No, you're.
But on that point, can I respond to that? Isn't if the site is significantly undevelopable, as we know with some of these environmental constraints, then it's very reasonable that if, let's say, it's a 5-acre site, that you've got only 1.5 acres of development, so that if you require up to the 5 acre or a significantly higher minimum, couldn't that create an overly dense or burdensome problem for the developer if you raise it too high? Because
there is a point that, yeah, probably.
And then the other thought is, I think Arthur's point about tying the two together, and I think it's a really good point about not having to go back. I am concerned about raising the densities without understanding exactly what our affordability component is, because we don't want to, once we make that change, we don't want to then penalize the property owner because we're making it more, adding a constraint that they did not anticipate. And so I think I really am concerned that I think they are more tied together than we want them to be. But it sounds like, at least from your comments, that we do need to kind of have them somewhat in tandem. Is that correct?
Correct. And I think, though, that keeping the envelope the same but allowing higher density would be a more straightforward thing to put on the table now. Raising the height too raises all kinds of other questions, and that would be the one I'd be more nervous about trying to do in the time frame that you're looking at immediately. But the idea of saying if we relax if we took the maximum to 150 or something, I think we can look at our information that we did when we updated this spring and be able to give you a somewhat reasonable proposal to look at now for that. If we're just limited to the same box and just saying if somebody can fit in more units and stuff.
I might point out that if the council were interested in basically rezoning, removing the overlay option, but rezoning the parcels to a higher density with some of these restrictions, that actually would necessitate a comprehensive plan change. And so it could not happen. The whole TOD concept at this point would have to be put on hold until such time as a comprehensive plan amendment could occur, and we've already done ours for the year. So that's just a heads up.
How about the idea of changing the minimum up to 60? Would that be big deal, small deal? I mean, would that take weeks to study?
For the affordability, there's no impact because that's in the range we've already analyzed and it's covered in the current language.
And I don't have a concern about that.
Arthur, are TODs usually done as overlays like this, or do you usually mess with the underlying zoning?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
TODs like this, are they, the way other cities do them, is it usually an overlay on top of existing zoning, or is it usually redoing the underlying zoning?
Both.
Okay.
It's almost a tie. You might be breaking the tie.
Well, there's two, basically, we're the third. Huh?
See, I guess, Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you. Good discussion here. So if we go to public hearing, here's my concern with saying that, okay, if we increase the maximum density to 150 units, just for illustration, but at that level, then the developer needs to provide a certain number of units at 35% affordability. We went through the process and we saw how hard it is to get 50% affordability. We basically would need to give people the land to make that happen. So my concern about adding a further restrictive income level at 35% is you could actually work against yourself getting the density. Because what if the develop, I understand what you're saying. I mean, you are going to get, if it's 10% of the units, you still are going to get, a couple more units based on the more density. I would not like to add that extra thing, even though I understand the principle of, trying to ask for more, just because I wonder if it might create a disincentive to get the amount of density, or perhaps some of the smaller units that in theory would be more affordable by being that restrictive.
So I guess my way of thinking is that you just need to provide the opportunities, let the developer, let the market decide where they want to go. You just need to have things in place so that if they choose to go there, they can.
Right.
But they don't have to make that choice. Councilmember Herbig.
I just want to say for the record, I support the mayor's proposal, and if we want to, I'm not saying this is going to reduce traffic on 522, but if we want to make it easier for folks to travel, one way we can do that is to let them live closer in, instead of having to come out from Monroe or Duval through Kenmore to their job in Seattle. This is a small step, but I think it's an important one because our area is becoming increasingly unaffordable for a lot of folks, and people are moving further and further away. And I think on some level it is kind of a social justice issue. People can't live anywhere near amenities like what we have here and what is closer in. So I'd at least like to have Arthur take a look at what we would have to give density-wise to incentivize some 35%. I certainly wouldn't want to force anybody to do that with this overlay, but I think it's worth examining if there's a way that theoretically could pencil out, and if somebody wants to take advantage of that, by all means, go for it.
I think with some of the changes that we're seeing coming down the road, I think it's important that we start to address some of these issues. So, Councilmember Curtis.
So some of this gets back to my original question: how many units, based on those examples, can you get for 5 stories and 6 stories? So the 5-story building with 134.6, that looked pretty good to me. And the only way to get the 148, at least with those size units, was to go 6 stories. So if you're stuck with the 65-foot, you're stuck with the 5 stories, it means your unit just gets progressively smaller and smaller. So I guess that's the question, is how small units are those? If we try to get 150 units into a 5-story building, does that make sense?
Excuse me. I understand what you're saying. We can try to illustrate the point you're making. I think it is deceiving, the question of just looking at density alone. A lot can be done, and unit design. You can do a 800 square foot unit that works really well as 2 or 3 bedrooms, and you can do an 800 square foot unit that stinks. So there's really a lot of latitude, and there's a lot of square, when you're getting to the heights you're at, potentially. So we can sort of try to give some insights to that comment when we're preparing this as well. But the other point too is, if people are doing that and they're doing it anyway, in fact, Bellevue and Seattle with their multifamily tax exemption programs, they did realize that some developers were doing really small units, taking advantage of the density of the property tax exemption, and weren't getting much public benefit because the rents are so much lower. So to some extent, doing something like this, doing what you're proposing, is a way, well, if the units are smaller, then it is okay to ask for more affordability anyway, because those units are starting at a lower market point. And so there's a little bit of dynamic goes on that way as well. And so Bellevue, if you look at their MFTE program, they say if you do small units, you're doing units at 40% of median, versus if everyone else is doing 50%, because your units are so much smaller that we're giving you the same public benefit. So, there are trade-offs that are going on all the time between design, unit sizes, and things like that. So we'll try to at least give some context for you to think about when we give this, if we do this proposal for you too.
Thank you.
Clear?
No. Could I just have a general sense that everyone is on board with the increased density and also requiring a lower level of affordability?
Not requiring.
Well, if you give the incentive, you
Yes.
would require it. So am I
Providing
seeing...
the option.
Right. So just like when you go to a point where you trigger units at 50% of median, you're saying above one, give you an option to consider that if you go above 120, it triggers an affordability level that's even greater.
Yes.
And the goal being 35%. I might come back at 40%, but we'll try to see what 35% looks like.
So I'm seeing 3 heads nod, 4 heads nod. Okay, thank you.
What about the option of the minimum of 60 instead of minimum of 40? What's the team think of that?
I'm happy with a minimum of 60 instead of a minimum of 40. Councilmember Danuski.
I want to make sure that it makes sense for some of those properties that don't have much developing land. So I'm definitely not against that, but some of those properties may not allow for 60 as a minimum.
But you can sort of tell us that, right?
Yeah.
Correct. And regardless, it would be, even if the rules said you could develop 100 units on your property, they still have to comply with the critical area rules, the setbacks, the height, the property line setbacks. So at some point, it's self-regulating, regardless of what the density
And they
is.
they can still redevelop under current zoning anyway.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you could end up with 60 units per acre in a quarter of an acre, because that's out of the other 5 acres, it's all wetland.
Right.
But on that quarter of an acre, you can only have a quarter of 60.
Yes, that's right. But that's better than a quarter of 40.
But these are just things that we are going to be discussing further, and the public is going to have a chance to weigh in on.
Yeah, we'll present
No
these
action
as...
no action is being taken.
Right. We'll present these as amendments. We'll add them in as amendments to the proposal and send that out for the public hearing and for your consideration, obviously.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Arthur, thank you, and it's a pleasure seeing you as always.
Conversation.
Next item on the agenda, staff report, SR 522, West A, 62nd Avenue Power Pole Realignment. Mrs. Overlease is not here, so we have Mr. Kent Bond. Oh, she just stepped out? Hank Herron's dad.
Your Honor, while Kent is coming up and maybe while Chris is coming, just a little bit on Sound Transit 3. Last week, we met with Rick Ilgenfritz, who's the Executive Director of Planning and Development for Sound Transit, and several of his staff, a couple of key staff that are assigned to this part of the county when they're looking at Sound Transit 3 projects. And it was a really encouraging meeting. We got a much better understanding of the process and when they'll be coming up with a draft, shorter list for the Sound Transit Board to review. Also, the 522 Transit Now exclamation point coalition is doing well. They're going to have another meeting on Thursday night at 7 o'clock. And we've been working with Linked and Spieth, a firm that specializes in this kind of work and helping our community be organized. I'll be bringing a proposal to extend their contract to you on October 12th, so stay tuned on that. And I've actually invited Betty Spieth and Sarah Langton to attend that meeting on October 12th. And with that, I think I've bought enough time for you two to get started. And this particular staff report item, we do need direction from you. It has to do with 2 public comments that were given earlier this evening regarding the movement of a power pole. Normally, we make these decisions at the staff level. This particular power pole is unique because the citizens who is requesting that it be moved, it's moving a little further out of the project limits that I'm comfortable with making a decision on. And it's also becoming a little bit less about the project. And so as a result, I thought it was more of a policy level decision that I needed your guidance on. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris Overlease, our Public Works Director, City Engineer.
And I have Kent Vaughn with me this evening. He's our 522 project manager. So the folks that spoke earlier, and particularly the property owner, Mr. McDonald, I think he did a good job of summarizing kind of where we're at with this 522 construction issue. So I wrote kind of a high-level 2-page memo that hopefully you had a chance to look at. And this exhibit is kind of the back of that memo to give you a good idea. So on the top left picture, I think that's a really good one. What happened when you underground on 522, the power undergrounds along the main corridor, it wraps around the corner, and you always have what's called a terminal pole. So we knew that the pole, we knew that this one was going to be there. So it was a design change. So when Kent was working with a contractor in the field, we had a utility say, hey, we can't fit all this stuff on one pole like we were expecting. And I will say, and I've done quite a bit of undergrounding, and one terminal pole is usually fine. So I think we got kind of thrown when we were told that we actually have to split it up into 2. So Kent and his team spend a lot of time looking at, the technical aspects, the right-of-way and driveways, and we'll be perfectly frank, if we put up the other one, what it blocked as far as views, it didn't even register with our team. And Mr. McDonald is right. We never want to surprise anyone, and our team has apologized to him many times. I do not doubt that he was surprised, so we've spent quite a bit of time talking to him and trying to understand where he's coming from. It's taken us quite some time to get to the point where we're at tonight. One of our big issues when splitting this pole into 2 was that this was near the end of our project limits for the project. You do work outside your project limits, you can lose federal aid. So we have since gotten the clearance from the state DOT that, I'll scroll down a little bit here. The property owner has asked that we move the pole from this location down here, that's that second new pole, to be further up, closer to 181st by the existing pole. So he'd asked for it to be around right here, and there's also an existing pole up on the corner. So we're gonna, either way, it's a 2-pole close to each other situation, but as Mr. McDonald said, if it's gonna be along his frontage, his preference is to have this moved further north. So we actually got the clearance from Olympia with WashDOT. If we do want to move the pole, we can. So we're clear of the project limits issue. Our estimate right now is about $40,000, and that's about $25,000 from PSC, their estimates. And it's also about $12,000 is Marshbank, our contractor's estimate. And then I threw in a couple $1,000s for construction management for our team. We do have project contingency should council want to authorize moving of this pole. So we have WashDOT's okay, we have the funding and the project contingency, it's technically feasible. I'm trying to think what else was in, what else should I add, Kent?
If we do relocate the pole, the communication lines will still be aerial. It'll just be the power that will be undergrounded to the next, to 181st. So there's a communication, the first terminal pole is a communication pole.
Let's go back up.
So all the communications will go up that first existing pole, which includes Comcast, Frontier, WashDOT's got a conduit through there, Seattle City Light, and I believe University of Washington, so they all go up that pole. That, coupled with the 3 phase transformers on that pole, PSC had indicated that it's just too cluttered to go up that pole, so it was a requirement that we had another terminal pole. We positioned that pole to try and keep that within the project limits, to try and limit the cost in terms of trenching, additional trenching, located it as far to the east to the right-of-way line to maximize the potential use of this shoulder for the adjacent properties.
So I know what I was going to add. You touched on it briefly. So I actually met with Mr. McDonald in the field last week because I really, truly wanted to understand what it would look like in the after if we moved this pole further to the left, which is north. And what Kent said is exactly right. You can't see it, but the intention is to have the main power line underground from 522 come up to this pole, and then it'll go up the pole and then serve that way. So these two heavy, thick lines right here are cable. Those will stay. This pole would move further north, and then these skinnier wires up here, PSC tells us those would still exist because those would be services. So the pole would move north, and the main huge power lines would be trenched underground and up the road. That's the bulk of the cost here, is undergrounding, more conduit, pulling those thick cables. So they would get pulled. You'd have the heavy undergrounding of power up to this new pole location, and then you would have those skinny lines provide service back to the south. So you move the pole, you move the main underlying power source, but you still would have aerial stuff. I'm nor electrician nor utility person, but I think it's important that we're just all on the same page as far as what it would look like. So again, we are truly apologetic to Mr. McDonald for any surprises there may have been. We've talked to our team at length. We don't like to do business that way. And I do think because of the project limit situation, I think we would have ended up having this conversation regardless, but surprises are never good. So we'd be happy to answer questions.
Councilmember Januski.
If we move the pole, are we blocking anybody else's views? Do we make sure of that?
Kent and I spent quite a bit of time out there. We went out with Rob and we looked around, and we think we're okay. It's right next to another one that's there. Did I go and knock on doors of everyone up the hill further? No.
Would we be notifying all the people around that the pole's moving again? Have a chance to weigh in before we did it?
I wasn't planning on it. I don't know, Rob, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know if we started establishing a procedure where every time a pole gets moved, we have to notify all neighbors and get their permission. I don't think we'll be able to move any poles. So.
Councilmember Smith.
I have a question on the cost. If the pole had not been placed where it was, and you had two options, which is put it where it's now located or put it further north, what is the delta between there?
If we had just done it at the time versus later, we would have saved
roughly, I think it's around 10,000.
It would have cost 10,000 more to move it further north, you're saying?
Less.
So 30,000 total.
Yeah, if we would have made the decision to bring it all the way to 181st, we wouldn't have to undo what we installed, so we wouldn't have to remove the pole, and we just install it once. The reason why we basically were, the contractor was working that area, they were installing the conduits, and we had to make a decision on where this was going to be located in a short order to keep them moving forward. And we basically placed it as far north within the project limits as we could.
Okay, but if you had, let's just say hypothetically you had talked to the property owner and he said, okay, I want to move it up here, I don't want it down here. It would have been about $10,000 more to move it up north before it had been installed at the current location.
It would. We're quoting it as being $40,000 to move it. If we would have made the decision just to move it to 181st, it'd probably be around $30. Basically, we're calculating it roughly $150 a linear foot to trench, and then it's just PSC's material and labor cost to do the work, which we roughly have around 25 to undo what they currently have put in place and reinstall it.
Okay. And can you tell me, are there any other projects where we have, I mean, we've done a lot of stretches of 522 through the years and a lot of other projects. I'm just curious if there's any other example where we have moved the pole or moved utilities significantly further in order to benefit a property owner.
I'm not aware of any. Chris has a lot of experience in with shoreline that she might be able to add.
Yeah, I have not ever experienced a pole versus view issue. It is not typical to have two terminal poles. I have not, during construction, had a utility company say, yeah, the way it's designed isn't going to work. So that is new. If we underground so on the 522 corridor itself, where everything is underground, then we have to trench on site to people's businesses. So we'll trench all the way from the right-of-way, and we could trench 100 feet to get to a business's building. We would install conduit on their building, and then the utility would come and pull the wire through the conduit up the building and connect with the weatherhead. So there are certainly businesses along, and sometimes residences along a major corridor like this, where we will spend this amount of type of money in order to make that private property connection. But that's where the main trunk is underground, and everything is underground.
Okay.
And I think that's the example I can think of. You have no choice when you have a corridor like that and everything's underground.
Yep. Thank you.
Councilmember Curtis.
So I guess I'd like to address the issue of private versus public view corridors. So over the years, there's been lots of discussions of we want to protect public view corridors. This issue is clearly a private view corridor. And so what Rob said, well, if we move it up to the top of the hill, then we should ask, to be fair, we should ask all the people up there, will your view be obstructed? Because right now we're listening to one person, one property owner, who says my view is being obstructed, and I want the pole moved for my benefit. So I'm not saying I've decided how I'm going to vote yet, but that is the issue. So if we move it up, then I think we should ask everybody else up there if they like the pole there. That's just as fair as going by this one person's vote and ignoring the people up the hill. So I think we should be fair to both. Either we don't care about or don't address private property view, or we address it in either location to be consistent. I don't think we should listen to one person and ignore the rest. And in a general view, we have taken out so many poles and so many wires on 522, we have improved a lot of people's views. So for the total good of our property, we have benefited a lot of individual people. And here's one person who it didn't work out. Is that, like I say, if we listen to one person, then I think we need to listen to any other person who has an opinion. So we need to be consistent is my point.
Councilmember Herbig.
Chris, how healthy is our contingency fund right now?
I would say it's healthy, but we're partway through construction and we still have,
Yes.
I'll put out my usual weather permitting. We still have a big wall to do. We have work around a stream, and we have another side of the road to do. And we have yet to close the south leg of 61st and do all of that regrading. So cautiously optimistic that we're trending just fine. But there's a lot of unknowns that could be out there, which is frankly the answer I would give you on any construction project. Until it's done, we don't know. However, today, the project has ample resources to do this work, should council want to do it.
Thanks.
Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your time and efforts in working with the property owner. And I appreciated the fuller picture that you brought here today of how it was something that just kind of occurred and, wasn't really anything we anticipated. And obviously for the property owner, he wasn't anticipating that either. I do have a couple of questions. I just want to make sure that the poll that I'm looking at, if you go back to your original one, the one in the middle there, is that the new one that was added?
This is the new pole.
Okay,
this
so-
one would have been there anyways. This is the new one.
And that's like literally a driveway's width apart?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Mr. McDonald's garage, and then the home is over here.
Got it, okay. And then one of the things that you mentioned in the memo is that if we were to authorize this as a council, that the work would need to be coordinated with the 62nd Avenue sidewalk project. Can you talk a bit about that and what your thoughts are?
Sure. Well, I'm sure council is aware that we received a highway safety improvement grant, I think it's HSIP, to do sidewalk on 62nd Avenue, and our intent was to pick it up where the 522 project left off on the west side. So we just got the money, we just started design, so that sidewalk will go from mid-block here at 62nd all the way up to 187th Street. And I just wanted to highlight, we'll be doing sidewalk through here in the next couple of years. Whether we can get to construction next year or the year after, I don't know yet. But we will be doing frontage improvements through here, and we'll just make sure that Kent is the project manager on 522 and John is our project manager on 62nd, that they're talking, and we make sure that if we move the pole closer to 181st Street, we would put it into a position where we didn't have to deal with it again later.
So it's not necessarily, from what you're saying, it's more of a coordination issue, to not necessarily that we couldn't take any action on moving this pole until that extra the new sidewalks were built. It's just more talking.
Absolutely. It's just a coordination issue to bring to your attention, but there's no reason the pole couldn't be moved and we could make it work with the sidewalk.
And are we anticipating at this point any other undergrounding or utilities needing to be moved with the sidewalk project?
No.
Okay, thank you.
So basically, the telecommunications wires they're going to remain. They're there, and they were there in the beginning. So that's nothing new. The only thing new is the pole.
The pole is new, and the lines have
And
been
ordinarily, you would have discussed it with the property owner before citing the pole.
there. It's unfortunate. I don't like to do business that way, and our team has had a larger conversation. I've had something similar, but not nearly as big of a deal happen to me at my house, and it's just not good.
Great. All right. Any further questions? Councilmember Curtis.
So I guess I would just like to clarify what I would like to see. So I would be happy to move the pole from a personal standpoint, as long as we take everybody else's private view rights into account. So we're moving from the previous discussion where we protected public property, public views, to now private. So we have one person who says, I don't like this location. So if we move it up the hill and nobody complains, I'm happy to pay the extra money. We have the contingency, we have the state's approval to do it. But if we move it up the hill and 3 people complain, then you're talking about 3 private people complaining against 1 private person complaining. And we either take private rights into account or we don't. So that would be the point I would like to make if we go this direction.
Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you. So I actually do, that is the conundrum in this as a policymaker and as council. We're not in the business of rearranging telephone poles so people can look at the lake better. I mean, that's just not what we're about. We are focused on improving public view corridors. However, in this specific situation, through a series of events, there was a surprise, and I think anyone would be surprised to have 1 pole on one side of the driveway and 1 pole on the other. I mean, kind of exaggerating, but to have them that close. So no one anticipated this. If there is a solution, which it sounds like there is, that is approved and we can afford, then I would be in favor of that. But again, I would definitely like to maybe the person whose property this is going to be on and knock on their door, and if they start wanting the poles moved around, then I think that's a problem. I don't know where we go from there, because we can't be doing this. But in this specific situation, I think there's enough here that I would be in favor of going with the staff recommendation.
All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Chair will entertain a motion then to authorize the city manager. to move the pole.
So
Is there a
moved.
motion?
So moved.
And I'll second. Any further discussion? Councilmember Curtis.
I would like to request a friendly amendment to that we get information from the other private property views that could be affected by moving the pole.
Okay, there's no such thing as a friendly amendment. You want to make an amendment?
I'd like to make an amendment.
Is there a second for the amendment to talk to all the other neighbors
I
to see?
second that.
Bickburn?
I second that.
Okay. So there's the amendment on the table. We'll deal with the amendment first. The amendment is to ask all the other neighbors if moving the pole or would cause a problem with them. Is that, that's the essence? Okay.
Correct.
So, Councilmember Smith.
Can we speak to that amendment then?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I mean, where does this end? This is ridiculous. And so, because we can't run a city by every time we're putting up a utility pole, we go talk to every possible person whose view may be partially impacted. I sat in my car at this intersection looking at this pole for 10 minutes, analyzing it and seeing that the new condos that are located kitty corner across the street, they would be impacted. You could make an argument that those would be impacted by moving the pole. I'm not saying that's good, bad, or what it should play a role here, except for to say is we can't. I just find it to be ridiculous to think we can go and talk to every possible property owner every time we move a utility pole. So that's my 2 cents worth on the amendment.
Councilmember Curtis?
That's my point.
I understand.
Okay,
I understand.
that's my point.
I know
We're
it
taking
is.
the first step in a slippery slope.
Oh.
So you're either going to protect everybody else or you shouldn't be taking the first step.
Believe me, I totally, the impact of how you got there is not beyond me.
And I guess my whole point is that we should have asked them in the first place, and we didn't. And there's been apologies given, so that's what I'm going by.
And that's why I asked what the difference in the cost is had it been put there originally, because I would have had no problem with it being put up there at the north end and let the property owner pay the difference on what that cost is. We'll eat the cost for the sunk pole, but why not say we'll move it up there and you don't have to pay the whole cost of moving it, but you pay the cost of what the initial delta was from had we put it there in the first place.
So I guess any further discussion on the amendment to ask all the other neighbors if there is issues? Hearing none, I think we better go with a roll call on this one. So the vote is on the amendment to require the city to poll all the neighbors. So clerk, want to take the roll?
Councilmember Smith?
No on the amendment.
Councilmember Sperry?
No.
Mayor Baker?
No.
Councilmember Herbig?
No.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
4-2. 2-4 fail.
All right, back to the main motion to authorize city manager to cause the pole to be relocated. Clerk, please take any further discussion on that one. Councilmember Smith.
This is on moving the pole.
Yes.
So what I'd like to know is, I am very interested in having the property owner pay the cost of what that difference was. Can that be addressed before this, or does this need to be addressed after this motion fails or passes?
Maybe amendment would be needed.
City manager.
My understanding of the motion is it's the staff recommendation in the memo to move the pole at city cost. So I think, Councilmember Smith, if you wanted to introduce an amendment, you could.
Thank you. I will amend it that we move the pole at city cost, less the difference between what it would have cost had it been originally placed in the north site versus where it is currently placed, and that the property owner pay that difference.
So let's be clear. The difference would be? that the property owner would be responsible for?
I mean, we incurred a cost of roughly $10,000 to put the pole where it is currently. We're currently saying that it's going to cost $40,000 to remove it and trench north, so the delta is $30,000.
So, no, what I'm asking, I guess, was what would the cost have been if he'd just done it, put it there in the beginning?
30.
30. So then the delta is 10, correct? Well, it cost him 30, they're saying it's 40, so the delta is 10.
Okay. Now,
Is my
he's
math
saying it
off?
would have cost 30 to put it there initially,
Right.
but it cost 10 where they did put it. So that would mean the delta is 20.
No, I think what we're saying is if we had moved it further north to begin with, it would have cost $30,000 beyond what we've already paid.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Strip the conduit off that pole, take all the stuff out it, pull it up, move it, plunk it back down, all of that is the 40.
Okay.
So it's a $10,000 difference of, you could argue, the picking up the messing with the pole part. The trenching, just to get that much further north and doing that stuff would have been an extra 30.
Okay. Then I would say that if we move the pole, then the property owner is charged $30,000 if he wants to bear that cost.
30?
It would be 10,000 difference.
Yeah, 10,000.
Or 10,000, I'm sorry. Thank you.
I'll second that.
All right. So the amendment is, if the pole is to be moved, the owner of the property is responsible for $10,000.
And the city bears the rest.
The city bears the rest. All right, let's take a vote on that. Is there further discussion on that amendment?
Did anybody second the amendment?
I did.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Clerk, please take the roll. We're voting on making the property owner responsible for $10,000 if we decide to move the pole. Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
No.
Councilmember Sperry?
No.
Mayor Baker?
No.
Councilmember Herbig?
We made a mistake. We need to make it right. I'm voting no.
Motion
All right.
fails 2-4.
4-2. Okay. Back to the original motion. And that is for authorize the city manager to cause the pole to be moved. Any further discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Sperry?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
No.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
No.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-2.
There you go.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess there is no council comments or initiatives. Is that correct?
It's on the agenda.
Is it? Oh, there it is. All right, council member reports, comments, and initiatives. Let's start with Councilmember Smith.
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Councilmember Sperry.
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Councilmember Curtis.
Nothing to add?
Councilmember Herbig.
Going back to citizen comment earlier, I think it might be worth taking a look at maybe putting in one of those "Your Speed Is" signs that flashes speeds where the speed changes on 68th. I know that slows people down pretty well on Juanita when they see they're doing 7 or 8 over. And I've experienced, I live right on 68th. I drive by that speed that change all the time, and I don't think it's we're not loud enough about that change happening. And I think one of those signs would be really effective. So
You're talking southbound approaching 182nd?
yes, I think that would be a great way to make it very obvious there's a change coming and you're going too fast. So I think that might be worth examining as we look at that area.
Okay, we'll do.
Councilmember Danuski, I know you have something.
Oh, just a little something. So Mayor Baker and I were honored to go back to the White House and be in an event with Michelle Obama for the Let's Move initiative. We met with other city leaders, did a lot of workshops with them to get new ideas and best practices, and then I had an event with her in the afternoon. So it was a really great experience. Learned a lot.
So a while back there, I went and visited our delegation, and I talked with Representative Del Benny's staff, and they're very much in favor of supporting us for the $260,000 for the EIS that the Army Corps of Engineers said is the next step. So they're very much in favor of supporting us for that. Senator Cantwell, it's kind of interesting what goes around comes around, because Senator Murray's chief of staff went out to private business with our lobbyist back in Olympia, Gordon Thomas Honeywell, and he's now chief of staff for Senator Cantwell, Travis Lumpkin. So he is going to, he said he's going to fix the immigration system at Kenmore Air. The fact that we have a customs and immigration trailer that on Tuesdays, if somebody comes in from that is not a Canadian resident, that comes in on another country's passport, they have to be put in a van and taken down to Lake Union so they can clear customs. And it's all because they don't have a connection to immigration's database. So Travis Lumpkin said that they are going to fix that problem. So hopefully we will get that fixed. Senator Murray's office, we talked to one of their experts on the Corps and on dredging issues and that, and they are not supportive of us with the dredging issue or the EIS at this time, because there are other projects in Washington they feel that are much more important. All in all, they were happy to talk with us. They were happy to see us. So, and I think they appreciate the fact that we're back there. Leadership training I went to, and with National League of Cities, and we had the ability to look at what Orlando is doing on their Emergency Operations Center, on their Traffic Control Center, and on their new E911 Center. And it was rather interesting because I serve on one of the committees for the state dealing with the next generation of 911, to where we're going to start to be able to use cell phones and text messages, and they'll be able to pinpoint where you are to get emergency aid to you. And it was kind of interesting hearing some of the stories. They have this nice little old lady that calls them about every day on the 911, wanting to know if it's safe for her to leave her house. She will call them before she gets on a bus, wants to know if it's safe to get on that bus. And she will ask them if it's safe for them to go, for her to go into a business. And so they look forward to her calls every day, but they do have some stories to tell. And then we also discussed economic development and how the city is working with small businesses in commercial corridors and strip malls to create jobs and opportunities for residents. And they have a really neat way of showcasing different restaurants and their foods and stuff, and running different promotions in the city. And while we were there, they had a taste of Orlando that they sent us to. The city did, and so we got to experience firsthand some really neat stuff in the ways they were building and their businesses and supporting their community. So it was pretty enlightening. And I think you've all seen the fire hydrants that have been painted. We are going to run a contest in the schools, I think, next spring. Dave Marin with the Kenmore Arts is working with us, and we're going to run a program to try to see if we can generate some interest in the schools and have the children who win decorate the fire hydrants around the school. So we're moving forward. So with that, we will adjourn to executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101 subsection I, some potential litigation. And we expect that to last
20 minutes.
20 minutes, and possible action might occur relating to the executive session. So with that, we're going to adjourn for 20 minutes and go into an executive session. Kenmore City Council is back in session from executive session. No action will be taken. And with that, we are adjourned.